but I will say one more time, I'm Richard Hayden, and I'm the Senior Director of Horticulture at the Highline, and I've been with the Highline for 3.5 years. And really excited that you all could join us tonight for this last of our series in engaging nature dialogues on urban ecology. And tonight, we're going to be celebrating city nature, insights from New York City Greenspaces. And we had a series, as I mentioned, really wonderful presentations and discussions. Tonight, we're going to be featuring three panelists: Rashid Poulson from the Brooklyn Bridge Park, Sara Evans from the Greenwood Cemetery, and our own Yuki Kaneko from the Highline. And they'll each be giving a short presentation on their respective gardens and what they're doing around urban ecology. And then they'll be joined together in a discussion and also answering some questions from all of you. So please use the Q&A function in your Zoom there. You can put your questions in and we'll get to those at the end of all the presentations. But most importantly, I'm really extremely excited to introduce our moderator for the evening, and that is Margaret Roach. Hi, Margaret.
Now I'm laughing already at your
I'm
saying.
oh wait, wait, because I've got some good
Oh,
stuff
it's going
coming.
to get worse?
Oh
Okay.
yeah. Margaret has been writing a very engaging garden column for the New York Times since 2020. I'm sure you all know that. And she has built an garden advice industry around her excellent book, website, and weekly podcast called A Way to Garden. And she has a wonderful newsletter there. I encourage you all to sign up for that for great, great stuff. She had a storied career in garden publishing. She worked as the editorial director for Martha Stewart Living and wrote a garden column for the Newsday newspaper and has received numerous distinguished awards. But most importantly, she is a real ecological gardener herself, and she has a beautiful habitat-rich garden in Columbia County, New York. Welcome, Margaret, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I grew up in New York City, so it's my pleasure to be welcomed by all of
And,
you. So
you know a thing or two about green spaces, I imagine.
I guess, yeah, I'm a little bit more of a rural girl these days, but hey, whatever.
Well, and you also know your way around a Zoom webinar, having
I
conducted
do.
wonderful
I do.
programming for a way to.
Yes, when you're a one-woman band, you definitely learn all your tech stuff.
Well, listen, I'm going to throw it over to you. Have a great time, and I'll pop back in at the end of everything. So thank you so much.
So, just in a matter of introduction, as the title of this event promised, we're here tonight to celebrate city nature. And I can't really imagine three more gifted practitioners of the art and science and just plain hard work of bringing nature to life in the city than our speakers tonight. So, what they and their expert, energetic teams do are really like magnificent acts of defiance and hope, to my mind. They make urban spaces come to life and bring joy to many. The ecologically focused horticulturists at the High Line and Brooklyn Bridge Park and Greenwood Cemetery contribute on such a scale that the three sites attract more than 12 million human visitors each year combined, the three of them, which I just think is like, wow, that's fantastic. And as if that were not heroics enough and success enough, the diversity of other life forms who find their way to these green spaces for sustenance, for survival, is pretty staggering too. It lifts my spirits each time I see one of the gardens reporting that a new to their site bird or butterfly or bee or beetle is making themselves at home. We humans are hungry for these sanctuaries, these refugia, and our animal friends are even hungrier. An example of all these living layers together at work came about when I remember talking about a milkweed moment with Yuki Kaneko of the High Line, one of our speakers, when we did a New York Times garden column together last year. And she said, the Asclepias was there not to be just admired by us, but to provide food to aphids, which will support another insect's life. A garden should be a place that has ecological function. And then she added this. Resiliency, she said, is the ethos of the place, the resiliency of nature, the city, and of people. And I think that's very well said. Thank you, Yuki. So, New York, New Yorkers, and nature are all truly blessed that the city is home to these three landscapes we're going to hear about. And I'm eager to learn more about how the gardeners make it all happen. So how things will work tonight, as Richard mentioned, each presenter is going to speak for about 15 minutes, and rather than do Q&A in between each talk, when all three are finished, we'll take the questions that you can put in the Q&A function on the Zoom toolbar meantime as they occur to you, and I'll be looking through there along the way. So let's go. Our first presenter is Rashid Poulson, Director of Horticulture at Brooklyn Bridge Park Corporation. He's a Brooklyn native who began his horticulture career in the Million Trees Training Program, where he studied and practiced arboriculture, urban landscape design, and ecological restoration. He joined Brooklyn Bridge Park team in 2012 and became director in 2022. In that role, Rashid focuses on the management, training, and development of the horticulture staff and on telling the park's horticulture story through tours, presentations, and community engagement. And somehow he manages to find time to keep his hands in the soil and maintains a connection with the landscape, the staff, and the community he's been part of for over a decade by managing one section of the landscape, the Pier 5 Uplands berm himself. I guess note you can't take a gardener out of the garden, right, Rashid? So welcome, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Oh man, thank you so much, Margaret, for that introduction. I
Mhm.
am gonna just jump on and get right to it by sharing my screen. And thank you everyone for being here tonight. Hopeful everyone can see this okay. Looks like we're going good. Let me go to full screen. Bam. All right, so we're here. So again, thank you everyone for attending tonight's panel. I am personally super excited and honored to share a stage with not only Margaret, but of course Sarah and Yuki. And of course, diving right into the discussion. My presentation here tonight is named Cultivating Community and Ecological Stewardship. For me, this twist on my presentation is really going to be about celebrating park stewardship as a way of sort of celebrating nature in our cities, given the title of our night today or tonight. So I'm going to jump right in. The focus of my presentation will really be about highlighting Brooklyn Bridge Park's strengths by design to help play a role in climate resiliency. I'll do that by walking you through sort of the landscape's establishment and also its function. And after I do a brief orientation in the space itself, kind of get listeners to understand where we are tonight, I will speak on the development of the horticulture department, a team that emphasizes ecology by bolstering plant diversity and uses innovative practices to foster sustainable habitats for all walks of life. And to do this, I will briefly mention some of the techniques used to care for our landscapes that again focus on providing for and protecting wildlife. Um, and hopefully, as we move through this presentation, I will subtly change some people's perspective on what beauty is in an urban, naturalistically managed landscapes. But you'll also hear more specifics about similar techniques and practices used by Sarah and Yuki's team in their respective spaces. All of these highlights will aim to sort of showcase the benefits of investing in the care of our public spaces through a sound funding model and how that investment is expressed in an horticulture operation. With my 13 years of experience at Brooklyn Bridge Park, I'll end my presentation by sharing a story from my early years as a seasonal gardener, one story that I'm reminded of daily. And maybe with that story and what I shared here tonight, I hope I'll leave each person here feeling a little bit more empowered and invested as stakeholders in the redevelopment, success, and care of current and future green spaces. There's a great need for us to have more voices in the rooms that lead to big decisions in our city, beyond the voices of public officials, legislators, executives, even practitioners and stewards. We need more voices as advocates of our public spaces. You're already seeing a shot right now of Brooklyn Bridge Park right on the waterfront. Our park is an 85-acre, 1.3-mile space that's along the Brooklyn waterfront, stretching from Atlantic Avenue, just passing under the Manhattan Bridge. And we're also cradled right between the East River and the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. The park itself is established where old shipping piers were that had fell into disuse during the 1980s during the shipping container revolution, where the waters of this area, piers 1 through 6, as seen in the photos, were too shallow for these new boats to dock and offload their goods. The space as it is now offers a combination of active and passive spaces, such as our Pier 2 outboard and its athletic fields as an example of active, and our Pier 3 outboard as an example of passive, with its large meadows and hedgerows that are surrounding our great lawn. Also notice the riparian transitional border along the coastline here, which is accompanied by 3 sound berms that also play a role in flood mitigation by providing channels for flooding waters to make their way in and out of the park, protecting the local communities. Outside of the concrete slabs that hold up the foundation of our piers, everything you see here is transported into the space, from stone to soil to plants. There we go. The park was designed by Michael von Valkenburg and Associates, or MVVA, who composed a plant palette of resilient coastal native plants inspired by what was still growing and thriving in these abandoned waterfronts. The park connects us back to the Brooklyn waterfront in ways that I personally couldn't have imagined as a Brooklynite. Since its development in 2010, we now see over 5 million people at the park between Memorial Day and Labor Day, whether playing basketball, taking strolls, kayaking the East River, or sailing along our beaches with our education staff. And in any experience that you're having here in the park, we are bringing that feeling of connecting to nature in our heavily developed city. Designed and installed with a dense planting layer from the beginning, we inherited this sort of loose successional plan that long term would provide dense shade, windbreak, and reduce pollutants in the area. The design brings together a combination of meadows, woodland edges, ephemeral walks, wetlands, salt marshes, coastal dunes, and even ornamental gardens. And it was planted with trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants, and even a ground plane all at once. The landscape utilizes fast-growing species like sumacs, honey locust, London planes, and sassafras, who are grouped together with an understory of plants like magnolias, viburnums, solidagos, and asters, as well as cool and warm season grasses like Panicum virgatum or Carex vulpinoide. The density was intended to outcompete early invasive non-native plants, while also starting a competition amongst these intentionally planted areas that would lead to an urbanized natural succession towards this long-term canopy. And we adapted the successional plan and its plant matrix into a managed successional plan. And we do this by respecting and valuing the investment of energy put into the growth of each plant and its resources that they provide by cautiously editing, pruning, and reshaping landscapes slowly in ways that will prolong the life of plants engulfed in communal competition and stressors of the urban environment. And this is predominantly accomplished by supporting the natural habit or trajectory of trees and shrubs by emulating what we would expect them to do in an undeveloped area or environment. We also carry an unbreakable approach to managing these gardens organically, which for us means no herbicides, pesticides, or fungicide use to solve plant healthcare problems or pest problems as they occur. These goals for us support the greater ecology of the region by adding resources of food and shelter to vital wildlife that either migrate through our coastline or overwinter here and call Brooklyn Bridge Park home. Over time, with competition and increased shade, we would see the loss of some species that will no longer thrive without full sun, and that's where our department comes in, to make informed choices that would see to the increased volume of park biodiversity while exercising ethical and sustainable environmental approaches to get us there. The beauty of the park's design is that no landscape is meant to remain static. They are allowed to evolve and transform through intentional plantings and naturally occurring instances of spontaneous plant growth, but always vetted by the gardeners at the park here. So I've kind of set a little bit of a stage here. I could probably talk endlessly about this or transitional process and successional management. But now let's sort of jump into talking about the horticulture team's development, its resources, and where we stand today. I'm super, super grateful to have worked with over 80 gardeners in my time at the park. They have been knowledgeable, committed, and equally, if not more, invested in the ideas and approaches to public landscape management that we offer. We started out as a band of seasonal gardeners year after year while advocacy for full-time staff was underway. but that was where the great decisions and desire to have a full-time staff were built. We wanted a team that would be knowledgeable, but will also form intimacy with the changes of the landscape over time. This way of staffing our public spaces also relieves the challenges of training a cast of new staff annually, especially within a constantly developing public project. We are now a proud team of 22 full-time gardeners, as we brought on more staff year by year as the park's footprint increased. And we also welcome in 3 interns every year now over the last 4 years for our horticulture program. The department itself is made of myself as director. We have 1 deputy, 2 supervisors, a horticulturalist, 15 full-time gardeners, 1 arborist, and 1 lawn and irrigation specialist. And our primary function is to keep the park safe and clean and stunning, but we do so by wearing all the hats that you might expect from a professional in a most exceptional or prestigious institute. We practice integrated pest management, soil analysis, garden editing, irrigation programming, landscape design, propagation, data tracking, shrub and tree care, as well as aerial climbing and rescue. We are also leaving room to experiment and grow further as long as we meet our annual recurring maintenance goals. Gardeners are also an important front line of the patron experience within the park, and that also ones that are deeply understanding of park usage itself. They are particularly savvy in understanding the usage of the park by wildlife, by observing flora and fauna relationships at play, which influence their decision making on how these gardens evolve in complexity over time. Each member of the team, both past, present, and future, are essentially curators. And as the years goes by, a person's work will contribute to a tapestry of community investment that they bring to the land, and adding to the health and success of our city that we live in. I am generally for everyone here as Brooklyn as it gets, being born in Brooklyn Hospital, raised on Brooklyn Avenue, and dedicating my adult life to Brooklyn Bridge Park. So all of these aforementioned sort of capacities are really wonderful to see that investment sort of as a career path happening back into the park that I grew up around essentially. And I really want people to understand that everything that our gardeners do outside of the physical labor itself had to be advocated for to show that the role of sustaining and advancing a landscape in an urban one and it's providing its offerings requires far more than just physical labor. The park is actually managed by breaking it down to the 16 zones that you see here, which is around about 1 gardener per every 0.7 to 1.2 acres of landscape. This ratio of garden per acre allows us to provide a high quality of care that balances natural aesthetics while prioritizing limited disturbance where possible for the benefit of wildlife and also the development of a microbiome with the park's juvenile engineered soils. Through spring and fall planting projects, we bolster plant diversity, bringing year-round seasonal interests, and adding beauty to the landscape that some may think can only be found in a manicured, ornamental landscape like a botanic garden. But our plant choices are centered around floral and faunal relationships that calibrate itself into an urban ecosystem, which connects us back to the unspoken mission of mine and the team's to change how people perceive beauty within a landscape. By leaving leaves and moving away from traditions like cutting back plants in fall and shifting that practice to spring. And when we do cut back, we leave stands of senescent plant material over winter and even through the year, showing that it can still be beautiful while, as an example, providing seeds as a food source for overwintering birds, as mentioned before. Or in other approaches, by cutting back pithy stems to knee height so overwintering insects can maintain homes in the hollow cavity that these specific plant species evolved to provide. And when a landscape may be or plant may benefit from a more thorough cutback, all cut material is generally left into the garden beds to provide those fundamental resources in shade and food, and in an aesthetically tasteful way. As a sneak peek of sort of the scientific angle of our work, I am really excited to show that our testament of sort of success in ecology is being more proven by the year. Back in 2016, we partnered with Macaulay's honors program to do a bio blitz within the park, where sophomore students hosted a 24-hour survey of park wildlife across nearly a dozen taxa like lepidopteran, marine life, and spontaneous plant growth in the park. This year, we were equally as honored to have an opportunity to host the Macaulay's Honors Program again for a second Bio Blitz, being their first place to ever be surveyed twice. Back in 2016, we had a great count of 248 species observed across the park. And within this weekend, a few months ago, where 500 sophomore students descended upon the park, we landed at a miraculous number of 508 species identified across its body. And we will hopefully have this data presentable for the public on our website by the end of the year. But it's just really great to see our efforts in sustaining and progressing the work happening and providing the spaces for what should be here. Organizationally, many of our strengths at the park, both infrastructurally and horticulturally, come from our financial model that makes it all possible. We are able to invest in the assets that heighten the quality of what we are capable of, like having a hort lab, a compost yard, staging area for seasonal plantings, and equipment storage areas across several areas in the park. These assets allow us as managers to provide for a team and their growth, both individuals and everyone. This is not luxury. This is what practical investment in our field of work and public spaces and city can look like. We have an education reimbursement program that allows staff to go back to school for degree programs or certificates offered by the New York Botanic Garden or Brooklyn Botanical Garden, as well as other accredited institutes. With this program, we were able to provide $10,000 to a staff member over their employment here. And we also sustain a robust and independent horticulture training budget that is ours to do with what we see fit that will accelerate the growth of our educational and practical skill sets amongst the team. Consistently, we see this growth applied back into the landscape with new approaches that the staff are utilizing. It's just simply amazing to see what a team can accomplish when they're provided room to learn, to be creative, and have organizational support to back them. We are also invested in the future of New York City stewards in horticulture. We bring in 3 interns each year, training them in the skill sets that we believe will qualify them for gardening positions, whether with us or other organizations as full-time gardeners. The program itself and the commitment offered by the individuals on my team who run it essentially hopes to spark the same joy that we all find in public stewardship. And I'm also excited to announce here that this summer intensive of 11 weeks will be expanding in 2026 to 19 weeks beginning in May. So again, you'll have to keep an eye out on the jobs board at the Brooklyn Bridge Park website to learn more. I'm sure that all of us have seen many spaces developed across our city that revitalize an urban space with lovely gardens, no matter large or small, but they're often lacking in continual care, leaving these green spaces to often feel quickly abandoned. Such upkeep requires consistency, knowledge, and it will always be hard work. But all it takes is one weedy spring to turn the most well-designed or prized urban landscape into a restoration project of its own. In everything the team at Brooklyn Bridge Park does, we hope to be an emblem for others to learn from about the value of investing in consistent care, ecological horticulture, organic management, and the impact that can be felt daily by all of us when we step into a green space. I'll end the talk tonight on my side of things by just leaving you with a quick story that has always stuck with me. Back in about 2014, as a seasonal gardener, we have a small landscape called the exploratory marsh filled with small trees and shrubs, and the pruning on the pathways is scaled down to mostly fit a child rather than an adult. And one day at the park, I saw this young girl with her family about to enter this marsh, and she stops them right at the entrance. I could tell how she was talking. She had been to the park before. And right before they entered, she said, "Wait, you guys, it's like a forest in there." And that's when my heart sort of glowed. Like this moment kind of was very affirming for me, especially as a New Yorker myself, where I said, "Oh, this is it. This is this place where a young child can feel a connection with nature, where they can turn stones and play with sticks and find insects and critters, something that I was necessarily exposed to as a young child in New York City." And I hope that we'll all be able to continue in this work and provide for the future. And with that, I would like to thank everyone, and I'll pass my time over to Sarah.
Thank you, Rashid. Thank you. I loved when you started toward the beginning when you said you're kind of changing minds about the impression of what beauty is. Thank you for that, because I think that's so important as
Thank you,
well.
Margaret.
Yeah. Um, so yes, so Sara is next up, Sara Evans, who's director of the Living Collections and curator at the Greenwood Cemetery. Sara credits her participation in volunteer conservation projects with her church and her school while growing up in Maryland, projects focused on the Chesapeake Bay, for instance, or Potomac River, for sparking her deep sense of environmental stewardship and community responsibility. She completed her undergraduate degree at Brooklyn College, where she earned a BA in urban sustainability with a concentration in environmental science and sociology. At Greenwood, where she's worked for almost 10 years and been in her current role for almost two, Sara taps into her passion for understanding intricate connections and interactions between nature and people every day as she manages the plant records of Greenwood's Arboretum, supervises environmental research initiatives, curates the living collections, and oversees the day-to-day operations of the horticulture department. So hello, Sara, and I'm so glad you're here. I can't wait to hear more
Yeah,
about Greenwood.
thank you, Margaret. Excited to be here. Let me get this all set up. And I need to swap. All right. Okay. So thank you, Margaret. And also thank you so much, Rashid. I just want to say I really admire your leadership and the culture of curiosity and care that you've really shaped amongst your horticulture team. It's this level of human attention that I think is really critical because celebration just isn't about acknowledging that nature exists in the city. It's like really about understanding how it exists, what it needs, and why those needs matter. And so in my brief overview, I'm going to attempt to continue to demystify the function of green spaces like cemeteries in this instance and their role in and greater potential in supporting the natural systems on the very local, regional, and even global scale. So just to reiterate, my name is Sara Evans. I'm the director of the Living Collections and curator at Greenwood Cemetery in South Brooklyn. Like Margaret said, I manage the plant records of the Arboretum. I curate the collection. I oversee the management operations of our tree and gardens. Plus, I get to supervise and assist in all the environmental research that goes on here. But first, I want to contextualize Greenwood as a New York City and an American green space and institution. So, when Greenwood Cemetery opened in 1838, it was not conceived to be just a burial ground. It was also conceived to be New York City's first public park. So I'm going to take you in a time machine backwards. So it's 1838. New York City was in the middle of the Industrial Revolution. It was growing at a rapid rate, experiencing cholera epidemics, drastic economic fluxes, a shift in scientific thought and authority. And this is all going on while the American project was continuously expanding territory through warfare, enslavement, displacement, and increases in technology. And in New York City, the expanding urban development and the increase in population really demanded infrastructure for the dead and green infrastructure for the living. And so Greenwood was born into what is known as the rural cemetery movement. So Greenwood is the third rural cemetery to be established in the States after Mount Auburn in Boston and Laurel Hill in Philadelphia. And shortly after the city of Brooklyn was incorporated into New York City is when the land was purchased from Dutch settler families by Greenwood founder Henry Pierpont. It was also purchased because the land was relatively cheap because at the time New York City was in a financial crisis and panic. So the homesteads were mostly clear cut and used for grazing cattle as depicted in this painting by George Harvey. This is from a point in the center of Greenwood looking out into the Atlantic Ocean, just for your perspective. And some of these homesteads did contain patches of old growth forests that were comprised of oak, maple, sycamore, chestnut, and hickory species. So the same species that do comprise most of our mature collection of trees. Um, all right. So Greenwood is located on the terminal glacial moraine in Brooklyn. So the hills and the valleys were intentionally incorporated into the cemetery's design to create an emotional landscape and invoke what David Bates Douglas, who designed the cemetery, to invoke nature in her finest dress, which I personally think sounds gross. But the winding roads, the dramatic clearings, the framing views of, Manhattan and the Atlantic Ocean and the harbor, was really supposed to serve a purpose for the visitor experience, right? Visitors were not just supposed to be looking at the cemetery inward, but also looking at the city outward from the cemetery. All right, so today, Greenwood is in a place that is much less rural. Greenwood is a National Historic Landmark, and 160 years after our founding, we remain what we've always been, an active cemetery and a cultural green space open to the public year-round from sunrise to sunset. Yet while our core function has remained constant, the landscape itself is continually evolving and responding to environmental pressures, operational choices, and it's responding to a shifting understanding of what responsible stewardship means. And over the millennia, the landscape has been predominantly turf, despite upon its original design as being more sylvan in quality. And this domination in turf has historically been justified by the belief that reducing, ornament and non-turf vegetation makes the landscape easier to manage. And I'm here to tell you right now that that assumption does not hold. So while managing, turf, a more simplified landscape might seem simpler, it actually has become really resource intensive, especially as the local climate shifts toward longer periods of extreme heat, more frequent severe storm events, and extended drought. And also, we are now paying for the externalized costs of fossil fuels, what we have been using in the maintenance of our turf. And so really interrogating the legacy of lawn and reimagining our ecological role has become a driving goal of the horticulture work that we do at Greenwood. And in a period of great precarity that we are in right now, institutions like ours must serve multiple functions and adapt to meet the emerging challenges of climate change. So using our resources not just to maintain our tradition of operating cemetery and memorial park, but to also help address the environmental crisis with urgency that requires a variety of maintenance approaches, diversity in design, and scientific study, which I'm about to breeze through. So Margaret, cut me off when I'm talking too long. So in meeting these challenges head on, one of our goals is massive reforestation efforts, and these include planting much small trees that are much smaller. So what you're looking at is a water oak, and it was planted in like a 2-gallon container, and we've protected it with Belgian blocks from the mowers because the mowers are very hungry. And we are also choosing tree species that are projected to be more acclimated to the climate 50 to 100 years from now. And so with the assisted migration of more southern species, we also are planting at a massive rate. So this is just for you to visualize the volume of tree planting that we are currently doing. So what you're looking at is our catacombs with 200 bare root trees staged in there. And this is what we planted just in spring. Our goal is to plant over 1,500 trees over the next 3 years. And that is because, like I said, our collection is old, the canopy is shrinking, and we want to restore that canopy. And we also began transitioning significant acreage from traditional lawn to managing this area more as prairie grassland. So this is a shift with the goal that was really to reduce our fossil fuel use, while also, trying to enhance the cemetery's ecological value. So we have about 30 acres of land that we manage this way, and they are only mowed between 1 to 4 times a year, really depending on need. And this has overall reduced our greenhouse gas emissions from our mowing operations by about 13%. We're 478 acres, just to put in perspective. Evidence of this growth in ecological value in these areas has been the appearance of grassland migratory birds like this bobolink. This image was captured by Rob Jett. He is a longtime birder in New York City, and he has led birding walks at Greenwood for over a decade. And yeah, when he saw this, he rang the bells on it because it was very cool. This bird has never been before seen in Greenwood before our prairie meadows. And the prairie grassland areas, they were chosen in areas known as public lots. So these lots were some of the earliest developed areas in the cemetery, and they're characterized by very little monumentation, and if monuments are there, they are very small and made of fragile material like marble and brownstone, as you see. So these monuments are really vulnerable to mower damage. So converting these areas to prairie, managed prairie grassland is also serving as a monument preservation effort as well. So even though mowing those areas differently did increase wildlife habitat, we knew we could do better. So we leveled up and we converted over 3 acres of these areas to diverse meadows comprised of native grasses and native wildflowers. These were designed by Larry Weiner and Associates, and these meadows have become so productive habitats that support so many pollinators, birds, beneficial insects, our Italian wall lizards, but I'm not going to talk about them tonight. And although a stark contrast in the aesthetic and cultural expectations of what a cemetery should look like, we believe that we are really sustaining the original design intent of Greenwood, which is the mission to serve the living and enrich the experience of visitors. And so for us, the meadows make it visible what lawn keeps hidden from us, which is the intricate relationships between plants and wildlife, the seasonal rhythms that connect us to larger ecological cycles, and also shows us the possibility that cities can support a diversity of nature and life. And I gotta say, our meadows have been pretty successful, and we've incrementally expanded this concept of diversifying the ground plane using native plants to more active burial areas. So this is what you're looking at is Cedar Dell. It was replanted a few years ago, and we've also were able to incorporate natural burial practices. So those are burial practices that, where the body is interred without having any of the preservation done to the body first. But also I'm not talking about that tonight. This is just another picture of Cedar Dell later in the summer. And we're also starting to just tack on to the areas that have been historically overlooked at Greenwood because they were not occupied by graves. But we have now reclaimed them from areas that for years were just nurseries to mugwort and ailanthus seedlings. And they're really challenging spaces, as you can see. This is my colleague, Jose, who is tethered to the fence, and he's planting Rus glabra, so smooth sumac, along this really steep bank. But yeah, this is an area that we are really putting, native species to the test, with really extreme conditions. There's been very little irrigation in this area as well, so really testing them in an urban environment. But also, we kind of see this as a project of establishing a seed bank of more aggressive native plants that co-evolved with the native pollinators here in New York. And so like if these, if these seed spreads, then it will be contributing to a more native volunteer plant community outside of Greenwood's gates. So this reclamation work highlights a fundamental reality that I'm really trying to drive home, and that is that the environment is not static, and neither are the forces that are shaping it. So the plants that we have been removing and removing, like the mugwort and the ailanthus, did not appear here by accident. They arrived through human activity, through global trade networks, and also through ornamental horticulture. And so zooming out, Greenwood is located just where a lot of international ports are. So there's a lot of nearby potential routes of entry for introduced plants, pests, and pathogens. So we're surrounded by major highways, of which the DOT estimates nearly 100,000 delivery trucks and commercial vehicles travel in and out of New York City each day. We're within 11 miles of 3 international airports, within 10 miles of port terminals, Red Hook Terminal being the closest. And then these are just some of the bigger nurseries around, so like Home Depot and Lowe's. And so our location to ports of entry and the fact that our tree collection is accessioned and is an arboretum made Greenwood an ideal location for the U.S. Forest Service to set up a multi-year wood-boring beetle emergence survey for the monitoring and detection of invasive non-native species. That was a very winded sentence, but early detection of this stuff is really vital to mitigating the spread of pests and pathogens that may cause a lot of harm to our wild forests and to the crops that we depend on. And this, the survey has been very fruitful. So many outcomes of the survey, including new state insect records, new host associations between trees and beetle species, and there was also a new species described by science. So new to science, it's a new Agryla species. It emerged from a European beech tree in 2019. And so it really does illustrate how the survey method can be effective for detection purposes. And then the potential for early detection through community scientists has been realized too. So this is an iNaturalist observation submitted by a New York City mycologist named Ethan Crenson. And this is what would be described as a new pathogenic fungi species found at Greenwood, found on a piece of pin oak wood. And if you guys don't know, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, but iNaturalist is so cool. It is a free community-driven platform. It's a mobile app that allows anyone to document and share observations of living organisms. And it's simultaneously a social network for naturalists. But it's a massive biodiversity database and one of the world's largest citizen science projects. So yeah, I honestly rely on this tool a lot, just like as a landscape manager here in finding new things. And I am ending on a couple things to showcase the ecological value of green spaces like Greenwood in New York. So what you're looking at here is a graph put together by Greenwood's environmental research fellow, Nick Compartino. He works for the New York City Bird Alliance, and he's also using this data in his current PhD. And over the past 2 years, he's been collecting and recording bat calls to survey the species and the bat abundance in Greenwood and then also places like Prospect Park. And you are seeing the results of the comparative survey between Greenwood and Prospect Park. And this is Greenwood right here. So Greenwood hosts significantly higher amounts of big brown bats than Prospect Park, which is over here. So the bat activity levels in Greenwood, he describes as being roughly equivalent to the activities he's recorded in the Adirondacks. So still investigating what that means and why, but here's a heat map of the distribution of two different species. Um, and if anyone didn't know, why am I focusing on bats? Who cares about bats? Bats are actually they're an indicator species of environmental health. They're really vulnerable to environmental change and habitat loss. So their presence and their numbers, it's really important to like take stock in. Yeah, so this is just sort of showcasing how Greenwood, because it's such a varied landscape between having tracts of like denser forest and then more open swaths of lawn versus meadow and some water bodies, you can see that they're really using it differently. So the eastern red bat heat map is showing that they have the opposite preference to big brown bats. So they gravitate toward the interior of the cemetery where we have a denser tree canopy, whereas the brown bats really concentrate around water bodies and also kind of on the edge where there's less tree canopy and more buildings. Yeah, so just indicative of the ecological value of a varied landscape, providing resources for different species that have different habitat needs. And then I'm leaving you guys with this. So I work at a cemetery, and one of the most common questions I get asked is why should people care about wildlife in Greenwood? And maybe it's because I work at a cemetery, and working at a cemetery really imbues a front of mind existential awareness. But I also think it's just about the feedback loop, right? Like we cannot degrade the living systems around us without degrading the conditions of our own existence. And also, from my experience working with wildlife rescuers, the birders, and pretty much any visitors who are interested in just walking around, people really do care about the wildlife at Greenwood more than they don't. And what you're looking at here are images from a 2-day rescue mission of a stray cat that climbed this 95-foot Himalayan pine and was trapped in a, I will not name, bird of prey's nest up top. Um, and this incident to me just really represents the collision of a couple things. So it's a collision of, the consequences of the affordability crisis that forces people to abandon their pets. This is just a reality of managing wildlife, managing a green space in New York City, is you are picking up and rescuing dumped pets and stray cats and everything else. And it's also, though, a consequence of the habitat fragmentation that exists in the city, right? Which limits nesting sites for raptors. And for me, this incident just really serves as a reminder that stewardship extends beyond tending to the landscape, and that something that Rashid also mentioned in his presentation is that like community care and environmental stewardship are the same work, the care in people and the care in the environment. So it's just a reflection and a recognition that we all share these spaces and our fates are intertwined. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. 478 acres. Oh boy.
Yeah, we're big. We're almost the size of Prospect Park. Yeah.
That's a lot to wake up to every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so our third speaker, Yuki Kaneko, who's senior horticulture manager at the Highline. Yuki earned both a bachelor's and a master's of fine arts from Tama Art University in Japan, where she was born, and she was subsequently awarded the Blanchette H. Rockefeller Fellowship to study art in the United States. And beyond that, she completed certificate programs in horticulture and in botany from the New York Botanical Garden, and further trained as a horticulturist when she was a John Nally intern at Wave Hill in the Bronx. She joined Friends of the Highline in 2016 to help steward its gardens, where she gets to express her deep passion for interpreting designed landscapes in the context of ecological conservation. In her current role, she manages the Highline's horticulture operation, plant curation, and programming to provide a naturalistic landscape corridor that connects people with nature. So take it away, Yuki. It's good to see you. And
Thanks, Margaret.
look forward to hearing more.
Thank you. So let me set up. Thanks, Margaret, and I'm really excited to be here today. And after following the Rashid and Sarah's great talk and work, I used to live in Brooklyn for 20 years after I moved to from Japan, and Brooklyn that is one of the reason why I stayed so long is because of the all green spaces like Prospect Park, Brooklyn Botanical Garden, and Greenwood, and so on and so forth. And the and really inspired me to study horticulture. And then when I studied horticulture, it was at the time that the High Line was opened and Brooklyn Bridge Park was open. So it's just incredible to be here with you all to have a conversation and the talk about urban green space. So let's get started. So, yes, hi everyone. Again, I'm Yuki. I'm a senior horticulture manager at the Highline. And ever since its opened in 2009, the Highline has been known as a landmark example of urban infrastructure reuse. And the Highline is a story of resilience, change, and evolution. Today, I briefly share how our landscape evolves and how a naturalistic garden and how we maintain the naturalistic garden in the built environment. So originally built as an elevated railway, the Highline was reimagined and repurposed as a public park. The park is narrow and linear, stretching about 1.6 miles long. It could be a little longer because Highline is getting longer and longer because the new Monahan connector and so on forth. But yes, this is the overview, and it's a ribbon of green and wildflowers where people and nature can thrive together in the heart of world's busiest city. And the history began in early 1900 when Manhattan West Side was congested industrial hub. The High Line was built to lift dangerous rail traffic off the street. The first train ran in 1934, transporting millions of tons of meat, dairy, and produce. But with the rise of interstate trucking, the train use was dwindled. Once the train stopped running in the mid-80s, self-seated plants took hold in the track ballast. For many, the High Line was an ugly eyesore slated for demolition, but for others, this ruin was a hidden wild garden. Joshua David and Robert Hammond founded Friends of the High Line to advocate for preservation and reuse as a public space, and then hired a photographer, Joel Sternfeld. His photograph documenting the High Line over a full year shifted the public view, transforming the High Line from the eyesore to a unique, astonishingly beautiful, and valuable space worth preserving. Then an organization held the idea competition, drawing 720 proposals globally. And the final design was entrusted to a design team of field operation, Dilla Scofidio and Renfro, and planting designer, Pete Odolph. The initial planting took place in 2008. The High Line is a continuous landscape connecting a series of small gardens, each reflecting diverse ecosystem. This creates an ecological story that unfolds along the park's length. If you enter the High Line at its southern end, the story begins with the woodland garden, and that woodland garden opens up to grassland, and the grassland transitions to shrub thicket and then moves into wetland. And the story continues with more woodlands and grasslands. The Highline Gardens look so natural, and many people think that our plants naturally grow this way. The original self-landscape was certainly the inspiration, but our gardens are, in fact, meticulously planned and curated. From spring, summer, fall, to winter. The beauty of landscape transitions seamlessly through seasons. It's been 16 years since the park first opened. The current landscape reflects the combined forces of natural succession and ongoing environmental changes. This is a Chelsea grassland in 2009. The garden was open meadow of native grass and wildflowers. Fast forward to 2022, the neighborhood has seen a number of building construction, but the plant community itself has also changed. Plants more adaptable to New York's hot summer and wet winter have thrived, and the extended shutdown and reduced maintenance during the pandemic led to significant increase of prolific self-seeders like asters. So to balance this plant diversity and shift of them, we've been reintroducing the native grasses. And this is 2025. The garden is regenerating. And this oak tree in the top right corner is a great example of how plants adapt to our built environment. Our plants not only grow in the shallow 18 inches of soil, but they are constantly affected by cities' microclimates or neighborhood changes like building construction. Here, the park literally floated above the construction zone. The trees continue to do well. After the construction, we adapted the understory with species that thrive in the new part shade condition and created a new garden, Oak Grove. And there's another example of trees growing in the demanding environment. This is the maple tree grove of Acer triflorum, 3-flower maple, were planted in individual containers right above 10th Avenue. Because of the container size, the tree have limited root space that restrict the water transport to the canopy. And they are in full sun, constantly exposed to elements like wind, heat, and also pollution from traffic. This picture was taken in June 2015. Now this is July 2024. The tree grew taller, but notice that sparse canopy and scorched foliage. Over the years, we've seen symptoms like branch dieback and defoliation during the high heat. After every setback, but trees showed incredible resiliency, reshooting and bouncing back. But these recurring symptoms indicated that trees were simply not happy. So this year, with the reconstruction of the aged wood decking frame in the section, we replaced the trees with a new species, trident maple. The tree is known to tolerate urban environments, thrive in confined root space, and respond well to the pruning that is required in this location. And tree has a brilliant fall color as a bonus. So we make these strategic choices, whether it's renovating or redesigning the gardens to adapt to those changes in urban environment. But what really makes the difference is that our daily stewardship. The Highline Garden is cared for by the team of 11 full-time horticulturalists and 3 seasonal staff and volunteers. And our horticulture practice is a balancing act of guiding natural succession, adapting to changing environment, and preserving original design intent. This requires thoughtful curation and constant intervention, the work behind making the garden look so effortless. For instance, we cut back plants not only to produce more flowers, but to reduce the height to prevent storm damage, especially in the area prone to high winds. Controlling the tree size is really critical in urban park like the Highline, where space is very much limited. So we routinely prune trees for visitor safety and overall garden's health and aesthetic. Weeding is an essential practice in creating a naturalistic landscape and preserving the design intent. And each year, we install about 10,000 plants or even more to respond to issues like pest damage and to keep the garden fresh and renewed. This fall, in addition to the trident maple mentioned earlier, we planted 30 native trees. One of them was American Hope hornbeam, a new species introduced to the Highline. And we do all this work in a very narrow park situated 30 feet above the ground, and that welcomes over 6 million visitors annually. So it is a major feat, and managing the logistics is always challenging. The team starts at 6:30 a.m. to make the most of the early morning before the park gets crowded. So this provides a limited window to use our utility vehicle. Otherwise, much of our operation relies largely on human power, and whether transporting plants to 10 blocks north or moving tools and materials by tricycle. And the Highline is more than public park for humans. Our gardens have a critical ecological function, providing food and shelter to local insects and birds. Half of the Highline's over 500 plant species are native to the North America, with about 160 species native to the New York City 5 boroughs. And plants like this swamp milkweed support a large number of insects. Our four-season gardens is a refuge for many birds, offering season berries throughout the year. A 2017 study by the American Museum of Natural History found 33 bee species on the Highline, and the recent bat study by the New York City Bird Alliance field biologists indicates that migratory bats use the Highline actually as their feeding site. So all these confirm the park is a vital habitat despite its urban setting. And because the Highline is uniquely situated, running through multiple neighborhoods, our park functions as ecological corridor, a sort of green highway that connects in the scattered habitats in the city. And we are leveraging this role by participating in the Biodiversity District. It is an initiative led by the New York City Bird Alliance. The district vision is to create ecological networks that connect major green infrastructure in the Manhattan Lower West Side, including the Highline, Javits Center, and other public and also private green spaces to create functional habitat to enhance the biodiversity in the area. We're also exploring ways to help the public to learn about local wildlife through public programs and community science. So if you are interested in joining this effort, the Highline is one of the locations for the upcoming New York City Bird Alliance Christmas bird count on December 14th. You can sign up through the website. And we support biodiversity through our practice. We don't use synthetic pesticide or herbicide, and we process green waste for composting through our offsite partner. And all tools are electric, and we intentionally leave the previous season's growth intact until spring, providing food and shelter for wildlife through the winter month. Spring Cutback is a large community effort that continues through March. It involves a total of 200 volunteers and the Highline staff, removing 100 cubic yards of previous season growth entirely by hands. The cutback timing is often debated, since many insects overwinter in a leaf litter don't wake up until later in spring. But we must clear the garden for the new season's growth, which is emerging earlier each year. So we do it carefully with hand tools to mitigate impact. The cutback offers a hands-on experience for people interested in supporting green space like the Highline, and it's a great opportunity for youth engagement. Many participants in the Highline Fellows Youth Program start here and continue working with the horticulturalists through the summer. We are cultivating the future through our landscape. So we started propagating plants from seeds collected right here on the High Line. We're currently planning to host our first plant sale next spring to share these resilient and locally adapted plants supporting biodiversity beyond our park. The annual horticulture celebration is the highlight of a horticulture engagement. So this year's theme is Urban Ecology. The celebration has featured on-site interpretive signage and virtual discussions, just like the one we are doing today. And we're carrying this theme into next year. To learn more, please visit the Highline website, www.thehighline.org, Nature in the City. And I want to end this talk with a quote from Pete Odell, who designed our garden. What you put down in garden is more a beginning. Sometimes I say a promise for the future, and you have to guide it to that future. The High Line is that promise, and it's guided by the tenacious advocacy, thoughtful planning, and visionary design, and more importantly, steadfast long-term stewardship. And that stewardship is a shared effort that sustains every New York City green space to remain vital space to connect us to one another and connect us to nature. Well, with that, thank you. And now hand it back to Margaret.
Thank you, Yuki. Thank you. Thank you, all of you presenters. Thank you, Rashid and Sarah. So we have some questions from the audience, but I wanted to ask you a couple of, selfishly, I want to ask you all a couple of things too. One of, with in the last, I've been writing about gardening for a long, long, long time. And, obviously we've, especially in the last decade or so, we've seen a real shift in focus, where we talk about ecological horticulture and people understand what we're talking about, or at least they've heard it before. It's not a brand new word like it was not so many years ago. But if you wanted to go get like guidebooks, handbooks, reference materials, you're going to find a lot more of those in the library or in the bookstore or whatever on Amazon, about traditional stuff, vegetable gardening, ornamental horticulture, how to prune this or how to whatever, plant that. So where you're doing Brave New World stuff, really, even though it's sort of brave old ancient nature stuff too, it's reinterpreting the most ancient form of planting and the way things work. But where do you each have heroes or references or places you turn again and again, like your guide, so to speak? I would just be interested to know, or you have a favorite book or a person who, oh, go see the lectures on YouTube by so and so, or read this person's work. Do you know what I mean? Any for all of us watching, any heroes, any people like that you turn to?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to jump in here first. And I hate for this to sound like too much of self-promotion or organizational promotion.
And you talk to yourself?
So yeah,
Okay, you ask yourself what to do. Okay, good.
but no, no, to be honest, like I mean, I'm sure many here are familiar with my predecessor, Rebecca McMacken, who invested a lot of sort of
Yeah.
foundational concepts in me. But I have gotten to work with some very engaging staff. I think there's two lenses of this for me. My time at the High Line as an intern during that period, I sort of got to understand what the effort looked like. I was sort of a, young intern that was sort of figuring it out, and I learned that if you put in the hard work, your team will support you and, invest in your growth in just like a personal, direct way. People like John Gunderson and, previous others like Maeve Turner and Andy Pettis have really been like cornerstone people in like how I carry myself amongst the team.
Mhm.
And then I also have this like wonderful horticulturalist like Evelyn Manlove, who is a part of my team, someone that's personally obsessed with plants and willing to jump into every conversation about horticulture. And I think I've been able to sort of live vicarious through gardeners that have been a part of the team because I just to maybe even lean a little bit in, I'll kind of end this here, but I saw a question in the chat sort of about what places do we go to find inspiration in the wild? And my story is sort of this only came to me in my 20s accidentally. My mother was a gardener at the Brooklyn Botanical Garden and passed this idea on to me. But my life as a New Yorker, trees, shrubs, etc., that read as infrastructure like any other piece. I wasn't looking up or down in different ways. And it's seeing the expressions of my teammates going on hikes and going visiting certain natural areas and bringing direct observation of what they're seeing about a particular plant
Mhm.
into the cultivated spaces that they are working with. So that's sort of where my inspiration is like constantly fed through conversation with my teammates and things that they're discussing amongst themselves that I overhear from a earshot.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in with any?
Yuki, you can go.
Yeah.
Go.
So I'll go. I just mentioned the Pete Odolph, that the garden designer, and the I always learn a lot every time when he visit and they give us a feedback and the guide us through what the garden can change, and the he's very much open to the change, and not so much about feedback like about plants by plants, but it's really the how he, he sees that the future of the garden and philosophy, and that's really influencing to me. And also like all the gardeners who I worked with are like all the every gardeners was really mentor to me, and it's really interesting that gardening, it's really very personal experience, and I don't, everybody's gonna bring their own life into it, or
Mhm.
bring sample into it. So everybody has a different approach, and the like every time when you work with the different gardeners, it's really great learning experience. And yes, these days a lot of voices, like particularly as Rashid mentioned, like Rebecca McMakin, that the to promote ecological horticulture. That's really the great resource to learn what will be the next step and what we can steward, and we can do differently or we can do more.
Mhm.
And also learn a lot from the people I work with, the staff, that the
Yeah.
a lot of people come from a different background and the different skill set and experience and knowledge. And the I think a lot of horticulturalists that choose their path as a second or third career, and it's really interesting that different people bring the different things into the team. So that's a really great way to learn
Okay.
way for me. Yeah.
And Sarah,
Yeah, I
any
mean,
heroes? Any?
my peers on the
Yeah.
screen right now, also reiterating many of the people that they already um, mentioned, but I will say one other person, William Logan. He is an arborist based in Brooklyn, New
Amazing.
York. Yeah, I mean, what I just always, I just like always love, I always ask him to tell me what he sees when he's looking at a tree, because like, even in anything that would be considered a defect in the tree, that is not how he describes it. He assesses a tree's beauty based on like interest. Like look at like the way like the tree just like monopolized space over here and worked over here. So um yeah, I really love his like ethos and his eye and the way that
Yeah.
he looks at trees. But also I need to give a shout out to just like a couple environmental science professors that I had in college. Like
Good. Yeah.
really it's like the systems framework that I really approach my work in. So like understanding plant communities and like I mean Yuki and Rashid know things are changing every single day. And so
Yeah.
like I will quote Brett Branco in that, environmental systems, ecological systems, they are not complicated like, a watch, right? Where there's tons of different parts, and if it stops working, you can kind of go in and see the one part that stopped working and fix it. No, like environmental systems are really complex. And
Mhm.
so often just like a web, and you never know sort of the cascading effects of like one change and everything else. So that is something that I'm really always thinking about, and incorporate into like our decision making
Good.
here. And then I also just wanted to say, because Rashid mentioned this and where I go to connect with nature, I really don't get out of the city much. Like I am more of like a country suburban girl. Like, like you said, I did a lot of volunteer work in the Chesapeake in Maryland. And then I also, was just like a woodland creature in my youth. But I have really fallen in love with the nature in the city because like this wildlife is so tenacious, and so I'm just pretty obsessed with like seeking nature in New York.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Glad you mentioned. I reached back to my bookcase and pulled out Bill Logan's Sproutlands, which I think anyone who hasn't read Sproutlands by William Bryant Logan, it's a total must. It's like revelatory. Anyway, so some of the questions there was one question about mugwort for you, Sarah. And I think everyone always wants help with their worst weed. Any kind of was there any aha about dealing with it? Because
What
did
is, yeah,
you
I
have a
think
tack? Is there a general briefly? Is there a general tactic or an approach that you take to it?
so. What I will say is, Marilyn, thinking that you think that we eradicated mugwort is a compliment, but we did not eradicate it.
No.
It is just a persistent reality that is just gonna be around, and I think that is something we all need to accept. But first and foremost, the scale at which we were converting these areas to meadow, we did use herbicide. It's just operationally like the scale, we couldn't solarize it. And also, with all the monuments in the way, there's no way we could lay down plastic flush to the ground without having to remove hundreds of monuments. So we did kill the vegetation with 3 applications of herbicide. But what I will say is it was not entirely successful because that was during a drought year. So, like, just a variable that is of the reality. So, like, a lot of plants did go dormant and therefore were not completely killed. And so, they did come back. Mugwort comes back. What I will say is, like, it's just about being diligent and in the area that you're managing a lot. And so, really exhausting, the root, the energy resources in the roots of the mugwort, and I guess also timely spot treatments of mugwort. It's just something you might need to live with. I don't know,
Yeah.
Rashid and Yuki, what say you?
Yeah, I think I don't like the words like invasive or like, plants or but the plants like mugwort, I think eradication will never be the goal. I think the con guiding the competition, I think that the way to go. And yeah, and the herbicide use that the sometimes it's a necessity. I think it's better than the till the soil. I'm a big fan of not to disturb the soil that the so if we so that sometimes we have to use herbicide for that reason. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to back up both of them in terms of just like it's gonna always sort of be there in theory, one way or another. And I think a great step is sort of continuing to explore plant alternatives that will continue to be competitors
Right.
in one fashion or another. One, of course, like whether you're talking potentially more aggressive approaches like herbicide use or like still fairly labor intensive approaches like sheet mulching and the continuity of deeply weeding those root systems or trading that off for a low disturbance to the soil by superficially scalping things, lowering vigor, reducing their vigor and trying, trapping their, photosynthetic cycles under a sheet mulch. And your most immediate season after that work has been consistently managed, finding new combinations of things like ironweeds and rudbeckias and asters and see what groupings can at least sort of slow that process where at least you can sort of commit to that piece they being there rather than continuing to spread within a garden potentially.
Right. So mitigation, not eradication, being
That,
the goal.
yeah,
Perfectly said. Thank
Right,
you.
which
I
is what the invasion ecologists, and I use the word invasion in that because that's what their title, a lot of them, they still call themselves. That's what they're guiding us to do with the worst weeds is to realize we're not going to get rid of a Japanese knotweed. We should find a way to mitigate and not let it go rampantly everywhere and spread, but we, and have realistic goals and so forth. So yes. So Amber is in the Q&A is asking, and maybe we could each just give a quick answer to this one. Which plant or animal in nature brings you sort of the joy or, this like wow thing that happens when you've come across it, or that's really stands out about one of the thrilling moments with a natural encounter besides a cat in a tree, Sarah?
Oh, that was a stressful encounter.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. It's no joy there. So who wants to go first? Yuki, you want to tell us what was your what's one
Um,
the most delight?
Most delight. Yes, I do like, yeah, it's hard to pick. But I do like spring ephemeral. Like, yeah, it just give me such a simple joy. And it also bring me a memory that when I was volunteering at the New York Botanical Garden their old growth forest, and that's the trout lily that I encountered. It was like, yeah, it was the first encounter, like how that those small plant along with the salamander that I saw there. It's all connected, and just a fond memory to me. And yeah, it's really my beginning
Okay,
that as a
so
horticulture
like
to come back.
the ephemerals like trout lily, Rashid, a quick
For a plant, I'm gonna say Phlox subulata just because it's personally a problem solver for me in some
Me
of my
too.
conditions.
Me too.
okay.
But if it was to be plant wildlife, either ovenbirds or
Um,
yellow-rumped warblers. We had a class with Heather Wolf, and the crew has been doing Cornell's ornithology program over the last year. So all the
great.
governors are like immaculate birders out of nowhere now. So that's like the only bird I have like a really good professional photo of, and that helps us like stick it in my memory. So yellow rump warblers and ovenbirds.
Okay. And Sarah?
And for me, it could be any cool sighting, but embarrassingly, it is whenever I see one of the most common New York City birds, which is a house finch, bathing in a puddle or in
Mhm.
just like a patch of dust, because it just reminds me, I'm just like, oh my God, I want to make it so that that puddle is very clean for you, but also you guys are so cute, just like cleaning off in a puddle. So I'm dead serious. That is what brings me the most joy.
Um, so let's see. Richard, I think you're going to tell us that we're running slow on.
I'm gonna unfortunately have to say, well, first of all, my favorite animal and nature experience is always the great blue heron. Anytime
Oh,
you can see one of those, and they show up in Central Park, they show up all over. I'm sure you get them probably at Greenwood. It's just always my reminder of this giant bird in the city. But yes, unfortunately, we have come to the end of our program, and it was a fantastic communication of really great information. And Margaret, thank you so much for
oh, sure. It's my pleasure to
sharing.
get to talk to everybody.
I know, really smart. And we could go on and on and on, but I want to honor the fact that we would take only 90 minutes of people's time tonight. Um, so I want to thank all of you. I also want to introduce quickly the Highline's Director of Public Programs and Special Events, Wei Du, who has joined the Highline recently. And boy, my gosh, are we so excited to have him because it's really helping out with all the behind the scenes stuff that needs to happen for our programs. But he's going to tell us a little bit about a survey that he'd like to conduct around this. Take it away, Wei.
Yeah, thank you so much for the introduction, Richard, and thank you to all the panelists and to Margaret as well. That was a great event. I just wanted to let you all know that at the end of this event, you will get an email through Eventbrite asking you to fill out a survey on Typeform. It's very painless. It's literally only 2 questions, and if you can take the time to fill that out, it'll be of great help to us. You can tell us what you like, what you dislike, what you like to see more of. So yeah, anything would be very, very helpful. And we look forward to seeing you at one of our events in the future. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You. Thank
Bye.
you, everybody.